Mechanic Certificate General. By the time we finish this lesson, you should be able to identify the consequences for mechanic certificates should you decide to get into illegal drugs or alcohol or things of that nature, cheating, falsification, aircraft records. What's going to happen should you start to get into these areas? It's going to explain what happens if an applicant, we're going to explain what happens if an applicant fails a test. We're going to identify the minimum scores that must be achieved for you to earn this FAA certification. We're going to describe the duration of this mechanic certificate. Once you have it and you possess it, how long is it valid for? Mechanic certifications are issued only to U.S. residents. You have to be a U.S. citizen or a resident alien. Non-resident, there are exceptions. If you are a non-U.S. resident and you want to get that certificate, and there's a couple of ways that you can go around it. One, if you're working in a foreign country on an American aircraft, okay, or a U.S. registered aircraft, you can get an airframe and power plant certification that way as a non-resident, but there are certain requirements that you have to meet. So if you're working in, let's say Germany, and you're working on, maybe Delta is flying 777, maybe they're flying 777s into where you're working, and you're working on those airplanes on a regular basis, you can get an FAA airframe or power plant certification as a German citizen working on those airplanes, assuming you can speak the English language. If you can speak it and read it and write the English language, you can get an FAA certification, and that certification is good wherever you go. But let's say that you're working in that same German base, but maybe you can't speak the German language, or maybe you can't, the English language. Maybe you can't speak the English language, or maybe you can't write the English language. You could still get an airframe or power plant certification, but it's only good outside the United States. You could not bring that certification back into this country and actually use your certification here in this country. So there's a couple of different ways you can get it. But for the most part, we're going to restrict this to U.S. citizens or resident aliens or people that can read and write and speak the English language. Individuals meeting the mechanic certificate requirements, the first thing we need to do is we need to fill out an FAA Form 8610-2 in duplicate. You'll need to have 2 of those. And you can follow it up. If you go to the FAA website and you Google, you get to FAA.gov and you find your 8610-2, there's some instructions that are going to tell you exactly what goes in every block as you fill it out. Once you get that filled out, then you can get with your local FSDO, Flight Standards District Office, and if you meet the minimum requirements, then you can go ahead and they'll sign it, and then from that point you can go ahead and begin your mechanics testing. Mechanics certificate suspension. What happens? What's going to cause you to lose your certification? If you're maybe you were an airframe technician, you were going to go ahead and test for a power plant, but you had your certificate suspended. You cannot test for power plant until that suspension period is expired. Mechanics with revoked certificates must wait at least 1 year before reapplying, and then you have to go back through the testing process to get recertified. Okay. Persons convicted of a federal drug offense. If you're convicted, if you have a final conviction date, you are not eligible for to possess an airframe or power plant certification for 12 calendar months from that final conviction date. So if you've been charged with a drug-related issue, you're okay. But when you get convicted, you have 1 year from that final conviction date that you have to turn in that certificate, and then after that 12 months, then you can go through the process of trying to get another FAA certification. Temporary certificates. So you filled out your 8610-2, you've got approved by the FAA, you've taken your written exams and your oral and practical exam and you've passed it, your examiner, your designated maintenance examiner, is going to issue you a temporary certificate upon completion. Or he's going to send you to the FSDO office and they're going to issue you a temporary airframe or power plant certification. It'd be a small sheet of paper, and in the top corner on the right-hand side, it's going to say pending for a certificate number. That certificate is valid for 120 days. If you have that certificate, you're going to sign off any airframe logbook. It'll be John Doe airframe and power plant, or John Doe A&P, and then the next thing is going to be your certificate number, but in your case it would just be pending until you get your FAA certificate number. That temporary certificate is going to be valid for 120 days. If you have that temporary certificate for 121 days, you cannot sign off your logbook with that temporary certificate. At that stage, you're either going to want to get with your examiner or get with your local FSDO office and say, explain to them that you still have your temporary certificate, you have not got your permanent certificate in the mail, and let them start researching it. If you need your certificate to work, don't wait to day 119 to notify the FAA. I would give them maybe 30 days notice and say, hey, I still haven't got this, can you research that? And the FAA can research and find out where your temporary, why you're still sitting on a temporary. Maybe there was a paperwork issue, maybe your records got lost. So let's not wait till the last minute to notify the FAA that, you know, tomorrow my temporary certificate expires and I still don't have my permanent certificate. Since September 9/11, we've implemented 65.14, and basically what this is the TSA is actually going to do some background checks on people as they're getting their FAA certification. They kind of do this under the radar, so to speak. Typically, if you don't have any issues, it's not going to slow you down, but should they find you linked to terrorist groups or something like that, they're probably going to hold up your application, or they may revoke your certification. We really want to make sure we know who's working on our airplanes. The duration of your FAA certificate, we talked about this already, 65.15. A mechanic certificate is going to be effective until surrendered voluntarily. You no longer need your certificate, you're going to surrender it. Maybe you've retired and you don't want your certificate anymore. Suspended, the FAA temporarily removes the certification from the holder. Maybe you've done something that the FAA has determined shouldn't have been done, so they're going to suspend your certificate for a period of time. Or it could be revoked, permanently revoked. Maybe they've caught you doing something that is more severe than just a suspension, and they're going to revoke it. If it's revoked, it's typically going to be a permanent type issue, whereas a suspension is just going to be a temporary removal of that certificate. If the technician seeks a name change or a replacement to the certificate, you're going to apply to the FAA. You can do it longhand, you can put it in the mail, you can send it to the FAA in Oklahoma City, or you can go to FAA.gov and you can search it there and you can apply for your certificate there. If it's a name change and you want to get a new certificate, there's going to be a small fee with that. If it's just an address change, again, and you want a new certificate, there'll be a small fee. But if you just do an address change on your certificate and you're happy with your old address on there, knowing that it was changed, there's typically not going to be a charge for that. The FAA, in accordance with 65.17, is going to designate maintenance examiners or mechanic examiners to actually assist you or to give you the oral and practical exam. We have designated testing sites throughout the country. Once you get authorization by the FAA, you've got that 8610-2 sign, you can take your written exam. So you can go to an approved written exam center and you can take your written exams. So long as you score at least a 70 on those exams, you've passed the exam. Once you've passed your general and either airframe or power plant, then you're ready to go ahead and do your oral and practical exam. If we catch you, or if the FAA were to catch you cheating or involved in unauthorized conduct, that would make you ineligible for that certificate for a year. Maybe somebody has given you all the answers to the test. I don't think that could happen, but nothing surprises me anymore. I've seen a lot of different things. But maybe you had an airframe certificate already and you got caught cheating on your power plant exam. You'd be in limbo. You could lose your airframe and your power plant. Unacceptable conduct during the written exams would include things like copying the test or removing the test from the facility, or giving or receiving that test. Maybe somebody has given you the test that they copied, or using any material during the test that would be unauthorized. Maybe you've got a calculator that has a memory in it so that when you have to know all these different formulas, maybe you're just hitting a button and all that memory is regurgitating information. When you take a test, they're going to give you a calculator. They're not going to let you use your own calculator to keep stuff like that from happening. Maybe you're involved with any of those incidents. If it just looks and smells like it's illegal, probably is. I wouldn't get caught doing it on the test. Cheating on an FAA exam is not a good way to start your career. Retest after failure, 6519. If you as a technician, for whatever reason, should fail your written exam, maybe you crack under pressure, maybe you tense up, maybe you knew all this material, but when you actually came in and the pressure was on, maybe you just couldn't pick the right answer. You're going to have to wait at least 30 days to retake your written exam. Or you could find a certified technician who could sign off a letter that basically states that they gave you additional training in the areas that you failed, the subject areas you failed. Your written exam sheet is going to tell you what subject areas you failed. Did you fail for hydraulic systems? Did you fail for, maybe it was general regulations, maybe it was fluids, lines, and fittings, maybe it was aircraft hardware, maybe it was basic electricity. There are certain subject areas in there that you failed on. They'll give you additional training in those areas that would allow you the opportunity to retake that written test in less than the 30 days. But if you're in an area where you don't know a certified technician, or you just don't have the time to cram it and get back in to take the test, wait the 30 days and go ahead and retake the test. If you fail your test and you just say, the heck with it, I'm not going to do it now, save that 8610-2. Remember the form we signed earlier that the FAA signed that said you could take those exams? That form never, ever, ever fails. Never, ever, ever expires. That form is going to be good forever. So 10 years from now, you fail your exam yesterday, and you're off and you're working somewhere else, and you say, oh, I'm just not going to worry about it. Save that form, because 10 years from now, if you have a change of heart and you want to be an aircraft mechanic again, you've still got authorization. That experience that you had that qualified you initially never ever expires, and that will qualify you again to start the testing process. Falsification of records, 6520. 14 CFR Part 43, paragraphs 9 and paragraph 11 give us some requirements for maintaining inspection records on the aircraft. The documentation, should you do make fraudulent entries or things of that nature that are going to, if you make fraudulent entries you know that are false or just not correct, or you change somebody else's entry, you're liable for punitive actions on that sort of stuff. You've actually at that time falsified the records. Maybe you've made false statements where you've actually say you've done something to the airplane that you didn't do. Things of that nature. Any false statement that you put in those aircraft forms or aircraft records puts you in jeopardy in accordance with 65-20. Change of address. We talked about change of address and change of names earlier. Again, you can send a letter directly to the FAA in Oklahoma City, or you can get online. There's an application process there online. Go to FAA.gov and you can do your change of address there. Address changes are free unless you want a new certificate that actually shows your new address on it. Remember, you have 30 days from the day you move until you have to have that address change back in your hand. If it's 31 days or 32 days, you could be nothing. You are in violation of this regulation, and there could be punitive actions that would follow. And let me back up one more thing. How would we know? How would the FAA know? Maybe when you've moved from Tennessee and you've gone to Kentucky, and Kentucky is now your new permanent record, and you've got a Kentucky driver's license, and your driver's license address is different than your A&P certificate license, the FAA can check on the spot and find out what your address is supposed to be. So anyway, back to that. If it's been more than 30 days and you haven't changed your address, get it changed. It's not that hard a process, and it allows them to keep track of where you're at and what you're doing. Refusing a drug test, 6523. As a certified technician, you are going to be required to participate in drug testing. We want to make sure that you, the technician, are not abusing or using drugs and things of that nature. We have a pretty critical job in what we're doing. These airplanes, if we're not fixing them the way they're supposed to be, they can become very dangerous. And the FAA is going to require us as technicians to be randomly tested for drugs. Okay, should you decide that you don't want to go ahead and do your drug test, at that stage of the game, we're talking about suspension or revocation of your FAA certification. So don't think that, you know what, I'm not going to go ahead and do my drug test today because I just don't want to do it. If you test positive for drugs, you're going to lose your FAA certification. Drug testing program is going to be in Appendix 1 of Part 121. And it requires you to submit to the urinalysis sample. Alcohol misuse or prevention, if you're coming to work and you fail a breathalyzer test while you're out in the shop working, again, if you fail it while you're at work, you're subject to suspension or revocation of your certification. Okay, when do we have to submit to drug testing? Typically, an employer is going to test you before they hire you. There's going to be a periodic, once a year, you're going to have to submit to a urinalysis, and then you could just be randomly selected for whatever reason. Your employer is going to have a drug testing policy. If you're concerned about that, you probably want to check with them and see what the policy is, but if you're doing drugs, you're not going to be compatible with, doing drugs is not going to be compatible with your FAA certification. Should there be an accident, maybe you had nothing to do with the accident other than the fact that you worked on that airplane. That's reason to believe we want to go ahead and do a urinalysis on you. Reasonable cause, return to duty after you've been off on a break for a long period of time, maybe a follow-up. These are some different reasons why your company may want to do a urinalysis exam. This is all going to be laid out in their operations manual, and so if you have questions, you can look at that, but most of us, come test me when you want. I'm drug-free. Okay. Maintenance careers. As an aviation maintenance career, it's going to demand the highest integrity. Refusing a drug or alcohol test in accordance with 6523, we are talking about high-caliber people doing mission-critical jobs. Poor judgment on any of our parts is critical. It's going to have major impact. Substance abuse is going to jeopardize aircraft airworthiness. It's going to endanger safety of your coworker, your technician, the individual that's working right next to you, or the individual that's working the shift opposite of you. If you do something because you're strung out on drugs today, and your coworker who's working 8 hours later than you in the same job, could impact him, it could impact your coworkers that way, or your customer, the individual that's going to be flying that airplane, the individual that's relying on you to do it the right way. In summary, the FAA has issued us some certification rules. It talks to us about how we can be certified as a technician, how we can maintain that certification, and what happens if we don't follow some simple rules, how we could lose that certification. Talked about how and what is required for us for our written exams to go ahead and start that certification process.